What is LGBTQ? Well, if you're just going by that abbreviation, it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. But that isn't half of it. The most inclusive version of the phrase, according to Duke University, is LGBTQIP2SAA, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer, intersex, pansexual, two-spirited, androgynous, and asexual. Some individuals tend to think that the A stands for ally, which is right out, according to an article from UNSW Sydney. And this was a point that was frequently debated in queer circles between 2014 and 2016. It's not that we don't appreciate having allies. It's simply that the inclusion of allies dealt with the erasure of identities such as asexual and androgynous, and we don't want that. A lot of people tend to bypass all the acronyms simply by saying queer, which is something that really seems to stick with the straights.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I resent you people using that word. That's our word for making fun of you. We need it.
But even that is a misnomer, because not only does queer describe types of people who are not straight or cisgender, but queer can also be used as an act, a methodology, or a method of at large gay communication. It seems really confusing sometimes, but not really, because the entire LGBTQ experience has served as a singular societal lesson. We are stronger as a vocal whole than we have ever been as a group of silenced individuals. Like lots of other queer rhetoric, it all dates back to the Stonewall riots of 1969. In our modern recollection of Stonewall, we understand that lesbians were involved and we understand that transgender people were involved. Most specifically, one of the very icons of the movement, Marsha P. Johnson, who identifies as transgender. But the movement itself effectively only created a social identity for the gay male, leaving lesbian and transgender identities to remain undiscovered for the decades ahead. The 1998 AIDS protests eventually made for a breakthrough for the lesbian identity, and that was due to the fact that lesbians were working as allies in the organization. And they made a point that they weren't going to remain anonymous this time. Of course, if you've been paying attention to the news recently, you know quite well that the debate involving transgender identity is still going on to this day. The LGBTQ community, despite adding that T to the queer alphabet, has still had innumerable issues with acceptance within the community. An article written by NBC News in 2018 introduces the antithetical T word, TERF, the suggestion that the inclusion of transgender women diminishes the role of feminism. In that article, it is reported that 12 publishers wrote, "We condemn writers and editors to seek to foster division with trans misogynistic content and who believe lesbian is an identity for them alone to define." I like to take a moment to think about that point. The attitude of 12 worldwide gay publications are inclined to say that it isn't up to us to define what it means to be a lesbian. You might hear that and think, well, if not those people, then who? But I personally believe that this is the culmination of LGBTQ communication. We choose not to be the ones who define what sexuality is to any individual. This comes in great contrast to every other type of social identity out there. It's this simple notion that actually allows all of us to come together and say that we are LGBTQIP and all the other letters. It's why I am proud to say that I am queer or asexual, which is that little A right there. Because while there might be some lingering debate as to whether a guy who doesn't have sex belongs in a sexuality debate, at least I know where to go when my parents start bothering me about having grandkids. I like to leave you now with a couple of lines from the oldest homosexuality theorist, Michel Foucault, a darling in the communication discipline. is quoted as saying marginalization is perhaps the most dangerous form of oppression. A whole category of people is expelled from useful participation in social life and is potentially subjected to severe material deprivation and even extermination. This is an act that the queer community should be applauded for avoiding, as their history has richly taught them that their own marginalization was what kept them oppressed, while their unification has given them the triumphs that they now celebrate at every annual Pride Parade. The second comes from Sandy Stone, author of the Post-Transsexual Manifesto. Transsexuals know that silence can be an extremely high price to pay for acceptance. I ask all of us to use the strength which brought us through the effort of restructuring identity and which has also helped us to live in silence and denial for a visioning of our lives. Thank you for listening.